Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So this week there's a slightly different introduction to the Embodiment podcast, so welcome. The guest will be on in a few minutes. So I'm going on a little world tour, partly for plays, for holiday with my wife, and partly to do a number of sort of gigs, a number of trainings in places I don't normally train. So I've been looking at the audience figures for this podcast, and people are listening from all over the world. And this would be a really good chance for a whole bunch of you, because I'm going to a lot of countries that have high listener figures, to meet up. And that could be a training, or it could just be for a coffee, or if you fancy showing me the sites, then I'd appreciate that. Virtual love is nice, but it's also nice to get together in an embodied way. So I'm going to be at the Integral Conference just outside of Budapest. I think that's the 22nd to the 27th of May. So that's the first one. So maybe I'll catch you there. That is just going to be a majorly cool festival. I'm doing a little piece of it, but mostly I'll just be hanging out in the sauna and swimming naked in the lake, etc. Singing naked in the lake. So yeah, it'd be nice to meet you there if you're somewhere in Central Europe, or if you're into Ken Wilber stuff, and there's going to be loads of cool embodiment stuff at that. Next chance to catch me, I'm going to be near Valencia in Spain for Paul Linden's intensive, the 18th to the 23rd of June. So of course, if you're interested in embodiment work, Paul Linden's a total master. You could look that up if you Google Paul Linden Spain or message me. You'll get details of that, or you can just again meet me for lunch, totally possible. After that, for the next few weeks, I'm in Japan. So I'm in Tokyo the 24th to the 28th, I think. And if anyone's in Japan, I would love to meet some people there, particularly yoga teachers, but anyone who just wants to hang out. I know we get some hits from there. Don't be shy, okay? I found the Japanese to be the hardest to contact in stepping forward, guys. So do step forward, do a little bit of yoga with me, hang out, we'll eat some sushi, whatever you guys recommend. Japan's a country, it's a little bit scary, in terms of, I know it's very safe, but in terms of traveling there for the first time. We do some Aikido there as well, obviously. So if anyone wants to join me for that, then let me know. I'm going to be in Kyoto area, and then ending up in Hiroshima, kind of that will be towards the sort of 7th, 8th July, something like that, 9th, 10th. Then I'm going to Australia. I'm teaching in Sydney on the 14th and 15th of July, one for trainers and coaches, one for yoga teachers. And then I'm going to be going around Brisbane, Byron Bay, Gold Coast, just tourism, and then teaching a full embodied yoga principles teacher training in Melbourne, 21st, 22nd and 23rd. Again, get in touch or look on the Embodied Yoga Principles Facebook group for more on those. Then I'm going to be in Bali. That's pretty much just a holiday. So if anyone has holiday recommendations or wants to hang out in Bali, I'm going to be there with my wife, July and the beginning of August. And then I'm going to be in New Zealand. So probably the South Island first, around about the 15th, 16th, 17th of August. And then traveling around. Again, I'm going to be on my own for that one. My wife can get a visa. So if anyone in New Zealand wants to hang out, then let me know. We're doing a teacher training Embodied Yoga Principles the 31st of August to the 3rd of September. And then I'll be flying home. So bit of an epic tour, mostly for fun, a couple of cheeky gigs. It's basically a sabbatical with my wife. I thought it would be a shame not to do a couple of cheeky EYP gigs and things there. So if you want to meet me at any of those, then just get in touch. So you can email me through Embodied Yoga Principles or through Embodied Facilitator course. Reach out on the Facebook group as well. As I said, it's really cool knowing people are listening, and loads of people are now listening to this. What would be even cooler is meeting some of them in person in their home countries. So don't be shy. If you're thinking, I don't know who you are, or whatever, then just have a coffee. It'll be cool. All right, so enjoy the podcast. So on the show today, Bence Ganti. So Bence is renowned for being part of the Integral World, a movement started by Ken Wilber. He runs the Integral European Conference, which I'll be speaking at fairly shortly. Big event, lots of cool speakers. He is a therapist, clinical psychologist, Vipassana meditator. He created something called Integral Flow. He has an Integral Academy. All things integral. Bence, welcome.
Hey, Mark, and hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me for this podcast.
So how did you get interested in working with the body?
I was learning psychology in Budapest. And I was fortunate enough to meet a private mentor, a psychotherapist, a transpersonal psychotherapist, meaning spiritual and psychological combined. And he introduced me to body-oriented therapies, basically. So we figured sooner or later, then you cannot avoid your body if you want to go deep and honest.
Great. And then you got involved in this integral world, which is the sort of theory of everything, or how everything...
Exactly.
If you're at a party and someone says, what the hell's integral? And, there's loud music and you're a bit drunk, what's your sort of answer?
Well, it depends how drunk, but let's say just a little tipsy. Then I would say integral is the integration of Eastern meditative knowledge and Western psychotherapy. So you get the global psychology when you have integral. When you don't have integral, you get partial approaches, like this approach or that approach, little combinations here and there. And integral psychology basically integrated all the major schools of psychology and spiritual traditions. So we have a unified system.
Yeah, I remember I was getting interested in Japanese martial arts and Western therapy, and I started asking, how do these all fit together? Okay, I need to make some sense rather than just have a mess of lots of things. And this was about 10 years ago. Someone put me onto this guy called Ken Wilber, this American philosopher, and said, look, this guy's got a theory of everything. He puts it all together. And then just intuitively, I thought, well, that makes sense, because whatever you're doing, for me as a facilitator, for example, or as a coach, I'd rather take into account the different perspectives that can exist, not just the Eastern ones or the Western ones, or the old ones. It just seemed more powerful to put it all together.
And what also distinguishes integral from other approaches, that is developmentally aware. So it builds on developmental psychology, and not only Western developmental psychology, which usually covers the territory from birth to adulthood, but Eastern developmental approaches. Most spiritual traditions like yoga, Buddhism, Christian mysticism, shamanic traditions, tribal spirituality have some sort of map of stages of development to enlightenment, unio mystica, becoming one with the spirit. So there are stages of the path, and putting together the Western maps of stages of the past and the spiritual traditions maps from stages of the past, that gives us a unified from birth to enlightenment through the rational adulthood. All the stages and twists and turns that people encounter in life are covered by this unified map. So that's the specific of the Wilberian integral psychology, being developmental stage aware.
Great, and that gives us more than enough to talk about for the next hour. I think this is going to be the juicy topic for many people. This developmental stages changed my life, certainly understanding it. But let's tease a little bit. So before we get into that, let's go back to body therapy. Some people listening might not be aware of the body therapy traditions. They might think of therapy as just talking, talk about your feelings, tell me about your parents, or CBT.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a whole tradition in therapy of working with the body, right?
Yeah. But you are right that when psychology and therapy was born with Freud, there was not much work with the body. People were just lying down and, talking to the therapist, and body-oriented therapies started to show up probably from the 30s. I would consider psychodrama also body-oriented, though it doesn't go very deep with the body, but at least it uses the body. You have to stand up. You have to, express through your body different things. So that's where it started in psychology.
So psychodrama is fun, isn't it? That's where different people play out different parts of your own mind. So it might be someone's representing your inner child, and someone else is your internalized parent, and someone else is the wild part of you, or the whatever part of you. And I've done a little bit of this work, and you get to make these little dioramas with other human beings as parts of yourself, which is just a huge amount of fun.
Correct. In psychodrama, you put there either an inner part of yourself, intrapersonal, or someone from your external world, interpersonal, like your parents, your friends, your boss. And usually it's a magical field where all these parts interact. The real people outside and your hidden parts. And you can switch roles, step into their shoes, their postures, feel into them, conversate with them. And in that, the inner, relationship with these figures inside your psyche changes.
I was quite skeptical when I first came across this. I thought, what the hell is this going to do? Talking to myself, some schizophrenic thing or something. And then I was quite surprised at how these different voices came out and said things that were insightful, and then the integration. You know, it's a little bit like a big mind process, but done with other people through the bodies, right? Like there's this integration. Yes. I was quite impressed by it and got a lot from it.
Yeah, the basic idea of psychodrama is action. Then when you put it in action, in other words, you have your father and, let's say, mother standing there and talk to them as people in the room represented by other group members, and then shift roles and become your father and talk to yourself. That's more powerful than just sitting in a chair and talking to your therapist about your father and about your mother and about yourself. So action, actually using your body in action, adds a lot to therapy.
Yeah, just shift things in a way that just talking about it doesn't. And, you know, there's other ways that therapists do this, like shifting chairs or even just shifting posture a little bit between talking. You know, I've seen subtler versions of it. And then if that's the inner constellation, there's also this constellations work with other kind of wider systems, right? So it's not just therapists sometimes now work with not just parts of yourself, but the system that you are in with parents, dead parents, grandparents, children, you know, family. For example, at one of the Integral conferences, you did this with all of Europe, right? And people, like Andy was the refugees, and someone else was Greece, and someone was Germany, you know, getting their money or something. And
the UK.
Yeah, the UK, who were probably off to the Brexit. I almost did a bit of Brexit myself. You brought me back. You brought me back from my Brexit running away from the European bureaucracy, Bence, and got me to the conference, which I do appreciate. I wonder if systemically we didn't play out a mini Brexit there. But tell people about the systems work. What does that look like?
Yeah, so you brought in constellation, which is the next generation after psychodrama. In psychodrama, you have the player, you know, tell to the other players what to tell, what postures to take. So it's basically laying out your own head, your own content. And in constellation, you just ask people to be your players of your life or energies in your life, you know, but you don't tell them what to say to you, or you don't show them what posture to take, but you ask them to intuitively, you know, do however they feel, and you interview them. What do you feel? How is it standing here in this position? So they start to channel the field. So the underlying notion of constellation, that there is an invisible field, or the unconscious, subconscious field, that we can channel and play out in a constellation work. And basically people start to channel your subconscious field, which is stunning how much it works. People usually don't believe it first, or skeptic, but if you go in it, a lot of interesting things happen that are actually true. So you figure that what people say actually happened in your life. You know, they channel, you know, sentences and issues that they couldn't ever possibly know.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit mysterious, and you can open it up from family constellations, which was the original form, doing it with family members, to system constellations, what's going on in a company, you know, in a working collective. Or you can open it up, and that's what I did at the European Conference, to nations, countries, qualities. And since it's a European conference, we started to constellate countries and heavy topics present in Europe, like refugee crisis, war, peace, soul of Europe. Actually,
hundreds of people doing this. I saw some of the video. I mean, it looked like it looked like the facilitator's gig of a lifetime. Is what I thought. I thought that must have been so much fun to facilitate.
Totally.
Like, because I've seen constellations work, and I've done a few. I was doing a little mini one with someone the other day, and I was their dad, and I just felt so utterly different than how I normally feel. But even as an embodiment trainer who has quite a bit of range, I have quite a bit of flexibility in my being. You know, that's part of my training. But I was just shocked at how different I became. And then the next one, I was with someone else. I was a 6-year-old girl. I've never been a 6-year-old girl. And it was just, I was skipping around, you know, and I never, even as an embodiment trainer, I was like, wow, this is weird, you know? And then I've also, the negative side, I've seen quite a lot of projection happen. Like, on the one hand, there's this intuitive, and I'm still not sure if it's just people reading subtle, intuitive body language, which I think we are geniuses at. So in a way, I want to almost take away the word just with that explanation. But on the other hand, there's this sort of field explanation that feels a bit kooky, but then it can feel a bit magic. So I'm sort of open-minded as to which of those two is the better explanation at the moment.
There are spiritual capacities, there are spiritual sensitivities, there is an invisible reality beyond the five senses. And many people who work with the soul and psyche, either in psychology or spirituality or both, start to experience this. So it's not just a matter of faith, but it's a matter of experience. Definitely, this is my case. That I was born atheist, and I just started to sense, invisible things when I started to meditate. I did Vipassana retreats, which is probably the least religious, most just sit and observe yourself kind of objective thing, but still it triggers intuition, it triggers, an extra subtle sensitivity. So when I work with people, I actually sense their consciousness field. And in my work with body-oriented integral flow work, part of the work is what we call in Wilber's integral, the psychic sensitivity or sensing psychic, phenomena and subtle energies. So and for a constellation, you better have that.
Yeah, I mean, the embodied skeptic in me would probably say that is simply observing subtle embodied phenomena and becoming more sensitive to that. This is maybe where we might differ in opinion. I don't think, and I know it's absolutely sort of fundamental in a lot of embodied theory, these sort of subtle energies. I just don't buy those, and this is where we might have a difference. But what's certainly the case is that people can become sensitive to subtle, in the literal meaning, phenomena which aren't immediately apparent to the average person, right? One can build capacities in these skills.
Yeah, so I give you one exercise that I invite you to do with your groups and see what the statistics will bring to you, okay? Have one person sit in front of the group, backing the group, so the person doesn't see the group, and behind the person, there is the group. Let's say 3 to 5 meters behind, there starts the rest of the people, and split them into two halves, like A and B, and ask one of the half of the group, let's say half A, to look at the focus person and think of her or him, and ask the other half of the group to look away and think of whatever they see. They look out the window and think about the weather, and then ask focus person to raise that hand from which side she or he feels the look.
Yeah.
I do this experience, and most of the time they sense which side of the room is looking at them, and there is no physical explanation. They don't see it. It's silent. They don't hear it. You can't, track it from some kind of physical thing. It's simply sensing someone's attention is the number one and first, sign that there is something that's going on, that the physical phenomena.
Yeah, this is something we look at in the martial arts, and how when there's attention, certainly there's something in that. And, you even hear snipers talking about this, in terms of not looking at people before they shoot them and things like that. Pretty harsh example. Yeah. Again, it's not an entirely clean experiment if I was going to be really skeptical, but I'm prepared to be open-minded about it. So maybe let's leave it there for now. We didn't look at the other body therapy track. So we talked about constellations, and there was also this sort of track coming out of Reich, wasn't there? And the kind of working with armouring and this, as someone who's involved with the European side, there was a very strong Central European tradition of body therapy. Yeah, Wilhelm Reich was actually, constellation is also European. It comes from a German called Hellinger, but this is the 19th, and since the 90s, Wilhelm Reich that you talk about, I think he was between the 50s, 60s, if I'm correct. And a little bit before that, but yeah,
or starting before that, and he was talking about that all of us are carrying a character armor, or an armor in the body, a tension, basically, a long-term tension that was built up through our character fixations. And as a therapist, you need to release that. You need to, if you talk wide language, break through the armor. If you talk soft language, release the armor. But there is no authenticity and healing and truth unless you break through that character armor. And I think at that time it might be something very unique, and novel of the era. But now I think it's just a very basic tenet of anyone working with a body-oriented psychotherapy. It's so obvious.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, they're only talking about chronic tension or collapse, different holding patterns. And I think this is pretty obvious. You can see something of people's character, the character analysis kind of stuff. You can see at least something, though, people might argue about details. And it's definitely something that happens when people soften and relax and open some of that chronic holding. You even see the yoga class, people's muscles get exhausted and then all of a sudden they have an emotional kind of burst and they start crying in the middle of a posture and they don't have any idea what's happening. But that's pretty, commonsensical from a body therapy point of view.
Yes. And also, I think that not only clinical people have, tension in the body and chronic tension, but normal people too.
Yeah.
Like we use psychotherapy these days to open up people to spirituality, because psychotherapy traditionally is for neurotic people to heal, to recover. But since the 60s, this is reframed that normal people are also broken. Everybody has character fixations. Everybody has wounds. And if you want to be authentically spiritual, it's not enough to meditate, but you need to go to psychotherapy, and you need to involve, body de-armoring.
Yeah. I go to a kind of neo-Reichian therapist myself. When I first met him, it's a few months back, I kind of, he said, well, what's wrong with you? And I said, well, nothing really. I'm not fucked up. My work's good. My marriage is good. I just want to grow as a person. And
Exactly.
Limits in my embodiment. I didn't tick any boxes. I'm not depressed. I'm not anxious. Do you know what I mean? And he was like, great. He was able to work with that. And now you said something that might be controversial to some people, but to me, I completely support this idea that we need therapy and not just spirituality. Because I have some friends in my kind of Buddhist communities who say, look, we don't need therapy. We meditate. So what would be your answer to that? Like, hey, meditation.
I know.
We don't need therapy.
I have such friends too, and Facebook comments whenever I post this integral approach. But what can I say? I have been in this for 20 years. I've been to tons of Vipassana retreats. I've been to Burma in Buddhist monasteries, in India in ashrams, and I see all the same pattern regardless of which path or spiritual tradition you go. The human pattern is the same, that those people who just meditate but doesn't have therapy, have certain interpersonal dynamics that they will never see that they have, and they bypass. So simply we are in an era, especially in the West, where we are free and we don't have to play roles. Eastern people play roles, spiritual role playing. Yeah. But it's what I'm saying is such, so new that I'm sure many people might get hurt when they hear this, especially those who idealize the East, that those are the pure traditions and we Westerners are fucked up and psychology and psychotherapy is inferior and the true path is the Western meditation. I'm a Buddhist meditator for 20 years, learning from the most rigorous Eastern sources. And still I see that we Westerners, and I think Easterners who come out from, a role-playing society as well, we human beings need both, because it's psychotherapy, the reflective interpersonal relationship where honesty is allowed without any boundary. In a spiritual tradition, you should be loving, or if you have anger, you should transcend that. Yeah. There are shoulds, and it's kind of re-importing religion. We postmodern New Agers think that we bypass. Not bypass. Transpassed religion, it's the past. And then we got into religion again in the name of yoga and Buddhist meditation.
Oh, religious diets, religious about being vegan or whatever. I like to tell my spiritual friends I'm religious but not spiritual, just to piss them off, Bence. That's my take on it now, just to see them confused. Like, is that possible? Why? Okay, so I think another argument here, Bence, is just like you can look at spiritual teachers that have just done appalling things and say, okay, if these guys are so, might have great stage development, and we'll come back to that shortly. Yeah. They might have great state, being next to them is like being in a wide open field of expansiveness. And they might have developed the spiritual line of intelligence, their spiritual intelligence, but they still might be really fucked up. They still might be stealing things or abusing their students worse, or, money, sex and power kind of stuff seems to just come up, and not just the occasional one, like nearly all of them. So, I mean, something's up with that, right? And I don't think we can say, well, they just needed to have had more meditation, because there's teachers who have done multiple 3-year Tibetan retreats, 50 years training with the Dalai Lama, 50 years, and they've still done it. So it's not like, so it's like, I think that's a really good argument to say, look, something's up here. And then also, I love this approach just honors the West. It says, you know what, we've come up with some good shit too. And this is what I love about Integral, is it says it gives everyone their due and says, look, there's good things here, there's good things there. This is how they fit together. So it's not just a mushy sort of everything's all good kind of pluralistic mess either.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. I agree with you. And you mentioned the spiritual teachers who abuse sex, money, power, though they meditated so much. It's those are the extreme cases. But for most people who don't abuse sex, power, money, but live an average life, they still will find that if they go to therapy, they will discover parts of themselves in the interpersonal behavior. It's not parts that nobody sees and it's only in you. It's parts that everybody suffers from, every day, but only person who doesn't see is you. Yeah. So that's why it's right. Yeah. And I think spirituality has to be anchored to personality, to interpersonal behavior. So those people who went to therapy and do meditation, I think, are more refined in their interpersonal behavior. And it's not because they are holding back their shadow and try to behave politely, as the spiritual book script says, but there is an internal taming and softening of the depths of the mind, basically, in the interpersonal behavior. Because when you sit in your meditation, cushion, then you might get totally rid of your ego. You might be in spiritual, void. You might transcend your personality. But when you go out and engage again in society and with your friends and in the workplace and in your family, then most probably go to Christmas and see how enlightened you are.
Yeah. I always say that's the big test. The joke we made in my family was that I could keep calm in Afghanistan, but not at the family dinner afterwards. like there's that was true. It's true there, and I've heard that was kind of Ram Dass, I think it was, maybe originally said something about Thanksgiving that I was kind of copying when that actually happened to me. And I noticed that there's I can learn a technique like centering, which is great for my state regulation. But then it's like, why can't I do that with certain individuals? Why does certain individuals trigger me? And then it's like, well, it's the same state, the same body in both instances, but what's different is the relationship, right? And if I haven't studied myself in relationship and revealed some of those deep, dark corners, I'm going to overreact. Even if it's just, this doesn't have to be like going crazy, right? It might just be being a bit irritated. Like an example is I have some shadow around stuff around like authority and bureaucracy, and I probably overreacted a little bit when you asked me to fill out a form, for example. And it's not a big deal. I wasn't screaming at you, but it's just a little bit like a disconnect from the actual reality.
Yes, filling out a form is, I agree, one of the worst things in our lives. Some people are still able to do it. So.
It's traumatic, Bence. It's traumatic. I'm still getting over it. I mean, every day I'm in therapy talking about it. That was the form.
It's better to have an assistant for that. So.
I use this as an example because it's not, particularly painful, triggering. It's just an example of a little bit of shadow stuff at work, right?
Yeah, we all have the shadow part, and everybody has we call it core fixation, which is a repeated pattern in the life when you, as you say, you feel that you, or probably first you don't feel, but people keep, showing you and give you feedback that you overreact, you are too sensitive in certain areas, you are a little bit, off of reality or how other people are coping with the situation. And, that's the sign that probably there is your core fixation. But the core fixation is not so easy to find because it has a surface part and it has a depth, like roots inside. And for that, you need the therapeutic side of the road, not just the meditative side of the road to uncover, to discuss, to understand that in a reflective relationship, in other words, with another human being who has unconditional acceptance towards you, no expectation, not even spiritual expectation, so you're totally free. And the person has questioning skills and conversational skills that brings out from you what you could not uncover just by yourself.
Yeah, that's the key thing, isn't it, with a therapeutic relationship, that you're not going to sit there, you can sit there all day meditating, you're never going to see it. Like the shadow you think you have is not your shadow. The whole point, you need someone, and it's, the emotional Groundhog Day, it's the person you keep falling in love with, it's the thing you keep overreacting to at work. Those are all indicators, but you really need someone else to help point it out, because by definition, it's that which you're repressing and denying. So by definition, you can't see that. And I think this is the genius of the West, combined with, I guess the next question would be, what does the East bring to that, right? So it's states, looking at different states of consciousness, and then also this sense of levels. I know this is one of your main topics, and it's one of the main things that defines integral work. So give us the brief, what is a level of development? If someone said, what do you mean levels? Are you saying some people are better than other people? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, levels, where if you just go common sense and you think that a 1-year-old child thinks, feels, and behaves differently than a 21-year-old, then you already got what levels are. So as we grow up naturally, we go through not only bodily development, but psychological development. And what are the stages of this psychological development from early childhood to adulthood and to evolved adulthood beyond what we call rational normal, then there are definitely certain stages that has been described by many, many psychologists from the 30s up till now. And what actually Ken Wilber did is meta-analysis or matching these different systems and tracking a universal, scheme of stages out of the many descriptions. So in this way, we say that there are 3 inner child in you, not just one inner child. There is the inner 1-year-old, 0 to 1. It has a different need set and skill set than the inner 1 to 3-year-old that we would call stage 2. That's all about interpersonal relationships with your mother, the second stage. The first stage is more about physical survival and getting your physical self up and running after birth. And the second stage is your emotional self, getting your emotional self up and running. That's where you develop bonding, attachment. That's when you develop sensing that the other person has a different subjective reality than you, So that's the mother-child relationship, early mother-child relationship. And the third phase is the kindergarten era from 3 to 7, broadly. And that's the era of psychodynamics. So that's when it's not only about mama and you, but it's about papa, mama, and you, and sister, brothers, mama, papa. So a whole, mass of psychodynamics starts there. And at that time, we are egocentric and impulsive. And even as adults, all of the stuff that for a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, no matter how old you are, but all the psychodynamics that you do now is your inner child from that age. So your inner level 3, basically, at play.
Yeah.
So the reason it's so exciting to know, because it's not talking about children, but it's talking about your inner parts of yourself that can be categorized or traced by, which age, which era are they coming from your development.
Yeah, yeah. One of my friends is a therapist. Will sometimes say to me, "What age are you now, Mark?" You know, when I'm kind of acting out a bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a really good therapeutic question, and everything you've said up to this point is really uncontroversial, right? Like people, when they see a child cover their eyes and say, "You can't see me," they know that's
Mm-hmm.
the developed sort of mind. That or they look at a child, you know, they wouldn't expect the same behavior from a 10-year-old as they would a 2-year-old who's having a tantrum. So everyone
Yeah.
has an intuitive model of child development, like that, you know, emotionally, cognitively, perceptually, and all these different, you know, all these different kind of ways of developing that
Mm-hmm.
there. And we also might have an intuitive model of values development. We might say that person's a bit selfish, you know, they're not as spiritual as that person. That person's much more
Mm-hmm.
generous, or you know, includes more people in their worldview. And where it gets interesting is this doesn't magically stop at puberty. It doesn't magically stop at 18 when people are
Mm-hmm.
officially adults and can vote. It keeps going beyond these childhood stages, right?
Yeah, well, we covered it until stage 3, but stage 4 is still childhood. It's when the child goes, older before puberty. The stage 4 is age 7 to 12, pre-puberty, and the primary, school years, and that's when we learn. It's very important because that's when we learn self-control, delayed gratification, like impulsive level 3. I want it now. Do I get it now? If not, I freak out.
Yeah.
And stage 4, I learn to control this, so I can go to primary school, or even if I didn't learn, they will have me learn there. So it's kind of control, rules and roles, which many of us hate. But to be honest, to be a healthy adult, we need to have an ability to have structure, to have order in our apartment, not just a mess, to be able to handle our calendar, to make appointments and show up at the appointment. This is all the level 4 capacities, and also thinking in structures and hierarchy. So here is where what we call an integral, sometimes we give color codes for this. We say blue behavior, authority and hierarchy, which is a great news when you come from impulsive mass. Yeah. And of course, it's not so great news when you are more mature adult and you want to get out from the roles and release from the structures. Then you will transcend this phase. But first, you need to develop the healthy stage 4 in order to function well as an adult. And stage 5 comes online around age 12. This is the rational mind. So, up until the 60s, psychologists was thinking that this is the ceiling of development. So they thought that at adolescence, you develop the rational mind, the questioning mind, the debating mind, the independent mind. That is the base of the modern democratic society, the scientific approach. I don't believe it unless I figure it logically and rationally. So that's stage 5. And what was so interesting about the 60s and later, that we figured that that's not the ceiling of development. There are even more advanced or later stages of adult development, which we would call postmodern, ego developmental stages, because modernity is rationality, separate self, Cartesian, Newtonian, 5-sense atheist approach. That's stage 5. And postmodern starts to sense that it's not enough. We need to reclaim our soul. We need to reclaim our heart. We need to, widen, deepen our body and the relationships. So this is actually where the body-oriented therapies and using the body and using therapy not just as healing the sick, but as for personal growth. This is all the postmodern stage of adult development, which we would call green if we would use the integral color codes. Stage 6.
Great. So let's play. We've got a bit of time, so let's play with these. Yeah. So these are individual stages of development, but you'll also see them in different groups, right? So different. Yeah. If you're in the American Midwest in a farming community, you might see more of this stage 4 blue, the kind of traditionalist, orthodoxy, kind of conservative. A martial arts dojo might have that. That's where I learned, where I re-owned a lot of my own sort of stage 4 was in a structured hierarchical martial arts dojo, or a 12-step AA meeting, which is taking people out of chaos and into order and structure and rules, and there's 12 steps, and there's discipline, and Anywhere else you might see? Let's do blue, orange, and green particularly, because they're the three that sort of show up most often.
4, 5, and 6. Yes, blue, orange, and green.
Yeah. Where else are people going to see a sort of a stage 4 blue kind of way of being? And critically, what's the relationship with the body there?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. Your body is something to conquer, I think, on a stage 4. Well, you mentioned martial arts because you come from there, and everything that's tradition or traditional is stage 4 or blue with the color code. So if a martial arts school follows a tradition and says that this is how you have to do it, you cannot change anything, this is how we have been doing it for 1,000 years, and don't add, don't question, just do it. Just repeating the form, what the tradition prescribes, that's stage 4. And if you take it out from martial arts, every religion is a stage 4 system, if it's a traditional way of practicing it.
I've noticed, sorry for jumping there, there's this sort of control of the body, like the body's dangerous, it needs controlling.
Yes.
Repress your sexual urges, monogamous marriage and structures and systems around sex, and not so much dancing. And, in martial arts, it's about forms and control of the body. So the body is something a little bit dangerous because we're coming out of that wild, egocentric. And, I always say stage 4 is beautiful when you go up into it. Like when I was in Sierra Leone, for example, it was nice to go from chaos to the order of the army there. It was a beautiful experience because it's like, it's safer, it's structured, there's rules and boundaries, and they'd read from the Bible every day before the Quran before we do a training, and it was really nice because there was this possibility of the real scary ass warlords and chaos of Sierra Stage 3, which people might sound fun if they're in a middle class Brighton and they want to think there was some sort of wild trip, but actually that shit's terrifying. So it's pretty nice to come up into stage 4.
Yeah, so that scary, terrifying, chaotic warlords would be stage 3, which we call also red, because red is associated with power and blood. So kind of red systems, wars, warlords. And yes, blue, stage 4 brings order, clarity, and control. Police and army, that doesn't let people to kill each other. And install a code. And for the body, yes, body urges are dirty, are inferior, are lower for a stage 4I. So you have to control them. Your body might be even your enemy, in Christianity. So which is pretty unhealthy for a postmodern, personal growth person. But that's where we all come from the Middle Ages. And even now, if you go to a traditional yoga school or Buddhist school or martial arts school, even as a new ager, you go there, then you might easily find yourself in a very restricted blue environment, controlling your body and your mind.
And they don't care how you feel, or they don't care your individual responses to things or your creative side. They're like, this is the form, just do it, obey, or you'll be punished. And so I've done embodied work with stage 4 kind of groups. And it's possible, but it's pretty tricky. Because I had to really get on board with kind of religious groups that are involved and things like that, because there is this sort of sense of the body being dangerous. But then at stage 5, things start to loosen up a bit with the body, don't they? They start to loosen up a little bit. So where would we see that orange or stage 5 kind of level? Where would we see that?
Well, basically, orange stage 5 brings modernity, and modernity, you do with your body whatever you like. You have the personal freedom and the constitutional right to think however you think about your body. It might be your friend, your enemy, it might be interesting or disinteresting, but to deal with the body. But on the orange rational mind, all the focus is in rationality and in the mind. So what people tend to forget is their body. It's not the body is the enemy, but people tend to forget to think or deal with their body, unless it's sports, achievement, goals, reaching goals. That comes with orange as well.
Body is a means to an end, right? So it's like, it's important to look after your body. Like my corporate friends who go to the gym or they do a bit of a certain kind of yoga. And they look after their body and they want to keep healthy. So they eat sushi at lunchtime, they eat well. But it's like, but it's still very much body as object, body as machine.
Body as object, machine, exactly. You don't see your body as, as a spiritual sensing organ or part of Gaia ecosystem. That's all will be level 6. So here body is more like a machine and organ, or a means to achieve, like to prove that you are the best. So competition is an inherent part of stage 5. Personal power, how far you can get, how big star you can be by your own effort, not by tradition pushing you, but by your own effort, your own creativity, your own, merits. So that's all stage 5. And when it comes to body, the people often use it like that.
So this was the MMA revolution in traditional martial arts, where all these traditional martial arts said, well, this works. And then eventually the Gracies came along and said, well, prove it. Let's have a competition and let's see what actually works. And they got very much into like rationality and developing systems and changing things to make them, to make them work better. And they'd say, oh, this technique has a high percentage chance of working. They'd almost use mathematical language, but they weren't somatic. They weren't so much like the feeling, intuitive body. In come the hippies, and they want to do free movement, right? This is where we're going to see this level 6, this green.
Yeah, level 6 started with the hippies, and the whole perception and focus shifted from achievement and the individuality into experience. And you don't have to achieve, you just have to experience. That's the main value in postmodern stage 6. I don't care if I'm not doing the technique perfectly, but if I deeply feel into it and got into a flow with my movements, that's good enough, even if I'm not getting the reward. Just let me feel deep, let me feel authentic, let me feel full. So experience is the keyword here, and authenticity.
Yeah, emotion, creativity, experience. It doesn't matter, no right, no wrong, that kind of postmodern thing. And you'll see, like in yoga, these 3 groups are at war. And they're sometimes mixed in weird ways. There's the traditionalist saying you have to do what Iyengar does. And then there's the modernist saying, look, I'm just doing yoga to get a tight butt or to stay healthy. And what's the most efficient way of doing a forward stretch without hurting my spine? What's the evidence say? And then there's the postmodernists like Scaravelli kind of lineages and more kind of, hippie lineages, not lineages, hippie kind of groups and individuals saying, well, I just want to be free. I don't want to do triangle. I want to do it my way. And it's all about motion and how I feel and the sensitivity and the connection to the group, because this communal piece comes back online. And I mean, I can see stage 6 people walking down the street just because they're more relaxed and they're more in their bodies. The body's really coming online somatically in a way that starts at level 5 and is actively repressed at level 4. And it's just like having sex with stage 6 people is a completely different experience, because they're actually in their bodies. You're not fucking a piece of wood. And it's a relational sex. It's a moving, flowing, creative sex, as opposed to just like, well, you have to just thrust your hips this way. Dancing with people like this is a different experience. There's the sensitivity that comes, as opposed to I've learned the forms and shapes. And I guess the problem, Bence, is they all fucking hate each other. These different stages, right? Like,
until the later stage of 6 comes along, which we call late stage 6, and we label it yellow or teal or integral, which acknowledges all the previous stages and actually acknowledges that we all carry those stages inside. So there is no point in hating, the previous stages, because they are not, worse. They were just before in evolution. These stages were created by evolution, and we are not dissociating from previous stages, but we are including them as we transcend them. So healthy development has the previous stages in a healthy form. You have a healthy structure inside, you have a healthy, striving, efficiency, rationality inside, and you need to have a healthy, experiential, relational, open-heartedness if you want to be an integral person. So all the previous stages add up.
Great. So in terms of body practice, this would be, for example, I practice a martial art. I'm okay with the fact that it has tradition and hierarchy and grades, but also I'm looking at, what actually works in this martial art. There's some questioning, and I'm also noticing how I am feeling-wise and relationally and sensitively within that. And now, instead of choosing, I can actually integrate. And also, this is the really cool bit for me, is that I can communicate with different types of people. all of a sudden I'm able to, the joke at my wedding was there was a family of kind of military people, a table, of military people, a table of business people, and a table of hippies. And I was able to move between those tables and talk to all of them, and they'd all be happy, but they couldn't talk to each other and just argue immediately. So so this is, to me, is the real beauty of integral. Is it's not just a theory, because this could all sound very abstract. Is this tremendously practical?
Yeah, tremendously practical, and you can, interact and connect with those people because you accepted and integrated those modes of being in yourself. So no enemy outside if there is no enemy inside anymore concerning those stages. And what I also want to point at, that for a postmodern, early stage green person, for the hippie, often it's necessary to go to a traditional system to get a deeper, understanding and development of the path.
Yeah.
Because if you are just after the experience in the moment, then you might not, go that deep. You might not go that far in meditation or in body arts. For me, it happened with meditation that first I was just sitting as much as I wanted, and the results were not so good. So I went to traditional systems, and I understood that the mythical stories are not necessarily, should be taken by word, and there are all kinds of magical layers added, but they sit way, way longer than I sit because they have a blue structure for sitting. They sit 10 days, 30 days instead of 10 minutes. So I started to sit in those systems, and it really, really transcended all my boundaries that I could have transcended myself. I could have given up way before. So traditional systems are a great vehicle when you are training yourself, to get trained in some technique, but just don't get caught up in the authoritative, ethnocentric aspect of those systems.
Yeah, you're not drinking the Kool-Aid, you're just using the kind of benefits of that form and that structure. And for me, there was a process of almost going backwards where I kind of integrated through martial arts, some of the blue, through business, some of the orange, and mixed martial arts, some sort of red kind of cage fighting-y kind of things, some kind of fire rhythms, and free flowing movement practices, and trying to work back through different embodied practices which embody different parts of this fully. And I always say, if people tell me they're integral, I say, I go through it. I'm like, okay, can you talk about your feelings? Can you sense this relationship? Okay, great. Did you make any money last month? Great. Can you still talk to your parents? And can you beat me in a fight? It's these different skills that come online. But I feel like embodied practices are fantastic for kind of working through some of the themes of the different levels as well.
Yeah. And finally, there is a new realm, kind of integral, meeting the early spiritual stages or states, the psychic. And that's what I was talking about. When spiritual sensitivity turns on, you start to see your body as a sensing organ to the field. So it's actually your body, those trillion cells, what is sensing the invisible spiritual realm. It's not your brain, it's not your mind that is sensing, it's your whole body that's intimately connected in the subtle field, and I personally have experiences of that. So that's why I'm talking about it from such a deep conviction that whenever I sense something subtle that's invisible, it's always my arms, my legs, my torso, my whole body is sensing it. The least my head or the brain is sensing these things.
Yeah, I think you're completely wrong about subtle energy. I think that's integral dogma. However, I'm completely with you on the increased sensitivity of embodied practice at that sort of stage of development. I mean, let's not argue about that though for now. Here's a risk in this, and this is a sort of stage 6 green kind of concern. Could it get kind of snobby? Could it get kind of, because I see a lot of arrogance in this, like, that's just a first tier thing, or, integral people saying that's such a green thing to say, you're being green meme. There's a sort of talking down kind of superiority that is perhaps a risk in looking at a developmental hierarchy.
Well, it depends on the person. There is healthy green and unhealthy green. So when somebody is criticizing unhealthy green, I think it's fine and not yet a sign of arrogance.
Yeah.
But if a person would say that anything that's green is inferior, then the person itself wouldn't be really integral. Probably the belief system is, but the personality is not. An integral personality, by definition, cannot be arrogant of the previous stages, but can be aversive of the shadows of the previous stages.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm honest, in the integral communities I've come across, often there's a real privileging of the cognitive. There's a sort of people being really clever, like some smart people, and then they've got this big system to justify how clever they are and how it makes them a little bit better than other people. And I don't, if we come back to embodiment, I don't always see people fully embodying an integral development, even though cognitively they might sort of talk a good talk.
Yes, I agree with you. The integral community is very diverse, and actually there isn't an organized community like we are the integral community. It's I don't know, tens or hundreds of thousands of people spread out over there without a company or a system unifying them. So it really depends on which people you meet. And I know that there is a subclass of this loose community that would be very heady, even for me, kind of disturbingly just ahead. But personally, my path and our community, that Integral Academy Hungary and Integral European Conference core team, we come from a body-oriented therapy tradition. And even in our Integral Academy, 50% of the time in the school is spent in group therapy and meditation retreat. And only 50% is lectures, because we think that, as Wilber described, by the way, originally, integral personality can be described as a centaur, that half of the body is a human mind and the other half is an animal body. And that symbol, that ancient Greek symbol, is the symbol of body-mind integrated.
Okay, great. Well, I think I certainly can relate to the centaur. Part of me feels like a wild animal. So I'm really looking forward to the conference. And thank you so much again for inviting me. I'm doing a little piece there, but mostly I'm just looking forward to meeting lots of cool people. I've got friends from Boulder who are coming, Brooke and various other people I know that we've had on the show that will be coming over. Diane Hamilton, who I hosted, various kind of cool people I think will be there. I mean, like in terms of body, I mean, is there going to be dancing, Bence? That's my first question.
There's going to be dancing. Not only there's going to be dancing workshops like dance your that, but there's going to be an ecstatic dance party at night. And at one of the nights, and the other nights, we are going out to the woods and we are going to do another type of ecstatic dance. I'm going to invite a drum band. So at night in a forest with drummers dancing around fires, that's also part of the conference, as much as listening talks on main stage.
Sounds like some good hippie shit. I know my friend Lilac is doing some whirling dervish stuff there, and I know Brooke is doing some dance stuff there, who one of the best podcasts on the show, by the way, listeners. If you like Integral, listen to Brooke's one. And also we had Keith Martin Smith on the show, who knows Ken Wilber out in Boulder, and he's a kung fu teacher, and we talk about development levels on that episode. So I'd point people to that episode as well. Will there be a boxing ring? Can I challenge people to fights?
Well, Mark, you can set up a boxing ring. We'll provide you with a garden for that. Maybe a cage for a cage fight, right?
At least there's a dance floor, and I'm hoping they'll be flirting. I'll be leading that charge. So it does sound like there's a good amount of body there. So you've convinced me. What else is going on at the conference? If people want to get last minute, they want to jump in. Well, I've heard it's at a beautiful spa resort, my secretary tells me as well.
Yeah, it's a spa resort. There's a whole building dedicated for the spa, and the whole conference hotel is on the lake shore of Europe's biggest sweetwater lake, Lake Balaton. So you can swim
and dipping late at night with Mark in the lake.
Exactly. With your flirting club, you can go late at night, to Balaton, and it's so beautiful. And we are going to have a big constellation again. So we are going to do the international constellation with 400 to 500 people in the process, not just watching, but in the process. It's crazy, wild, big. We never experienced such a big group going into a long non-verbal process where music and consciousness and the group field runs the group with least instruction and most self-organizing soul orgy, basically, through the body. So that's deeply body-oriented, Mark.
That's so cool. And which actually, people are probably wondering, we didn't place your crazy accent at the beginning. You're half Hungarian, half American, is that right?
Yes, and the craziness comes from the Hungarian part.
So it's like,
as far as the accent, as far as personality, that comes from the American part.
So one part of you is high-fiving, the other part of you is making a cynical joke about that.
Exactly. And Hungarians are emotional, and they use the heart space and the body more than Western Europeans. So no wonder why the Hungarian integral community is so deeply body, emotional, intuition, and heart centered. So Hungary is a very fertile soil for the centauric concept.
I like Hungary a lot. Not just for the spas. There's various other reasons. I've been there a few times teaching and do like it a lot. My secretary's Hungarian as well, so probably out there, meet her out there. Have you still got 10 more minutes, Bence? Can we go for 10 minutes more? I'd like to ask.
Sure.
Is that cool? There's just so many good topics here. I mean, in terms of the sort of European side, as someone... So the biggest audience for this podcast, the first biggest audience is America, particularly California, where I know you work. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the audience is mostly Anglo countries, like Australia and Canada and the UK are the next three countries. And then all the European ones. So we have a good listenership in France, Italy, Belgium, Holland, Sweden. We have a good listenership across. What do you see is different? It's such a big area, Europe. You run the European conference. What do you see as different in the embodiment in Europe compared to the States when you work there? And I know it's a horrible question.
Yeah, it's a horrible and beautiful question. I think Americans use their mind very skillfully and use their body less than Europeans. Europeans use their mind too, but there is more relational and body closeness in Europe. So people physically go closer in Europe to each other, body to body. And in California, the physical distance is bigger. So when you stop and chat with someone, you step a few inches more far away in California than in Europe.
Okay.
And this is the elephant in the room that I think everyone gets immediately when goes first to California, but probably Californians don't get. And when my Californian friends to come to Europe, they feel that we Europeans are slow. And we are just, working out things slowly. The groups are not running so quickly. For us, it's natural. For them, it's slow. So it's cultural activity, and perception. But one thing is sure, when you first come to Europe from America, tell us what you see, because you have the fresh eye perspective that we lost. And when we go to America first, we're happy to tell you because we have that fresh eye. Even I, as Bence, after a few years in America, I forget to see the things that I first saw and which were the elephants in the room. So it's very exciting to compare cultures.
That's the beauty of travel and the beauty of kind of having people from elsewhere in your own home, isn't it? And part of these differences are developmental, right? Developmental levels in different parts of the States and different parts of Europe. I'd see differences in, say, Scandinavia versus Eastern Europe, for example. But then there's typological differences. Like there's a sort of down quality to a lot of Hungarians, and the Italians have more of an up quality. I mean, what other differences do you see somatically between European countries? Because you have groups there. It's so international, isn't it? You have groups there from over Europe.
When I work with Europeans, Central and Eastern Europeans, by that Central I mean Hungary, Slovakia, Czech, Poland, that axis of Europe, and Eastern Europe like Ukrainian, Russian, etc. So Central and Eastern are quickly ready to work deeply with the body.
They like depth.
And and Western Europeans like more to talk first, and they are a little embarrassed if I come with the Hungarian pace of going to deep body processes psychotherapeutically. So somehow there is a readiness of working with body and emotions, which is a good news and also bad news. Because when you use your body more in society, you have more emotionality, which is not only more love and joy, but more sadness, anger, and fight. If you control your body more, like I think the Anglo-Saxons control the body more, they're a little more cool for Eastern Europeans, but they are also more successful in probably organizing society because they don't freak out emotionally so often, or
there's more control, which means less aggressiveness, but more regulation. And between North and West Europe versus South and East Europe, and I think between North and South America, we've got a similar distinction. It's partly just weather based, I think, and like it's in the warm countries. Yeah, right. It does make a difference. We had I'd point people to Bibiana's podcast. She was talking about Spanish culture, and there's another podcast from an Italian yoga teacher I had on, and they. One of the obsessions on this podcast, so maybe we'll get you back to talk about culture more. Listen, we need to wrap up, and I'm so happy I've had a good chance to speak with you, because I know you're going to be pulled in 600 directions when I see you in a few weeks. Thank you so much for your time. And just last of all, so 2 things to finish. First up, if people want to join us, if they want to join me swimming naked in the lake, or they want to get intellectual, how do they find out about the conference?
They go to integraleuropeanconference.com, as simple as that. So website is the same as the name of the conference, integraleuropeanconference.com. Check it out and come with us.
Great. And I'd just love to say to listeners, I don't often let people kind of advertise specific events, but this is one I'm really excited to go to. I'm pumped to. Bence hasn't paid me for this or anything. I'd love to hear meet some of the listeners of the podcast that I see out there. It would be a great place to do it, right in the middle of Europe in a beautiful location. Come if you're there and you see me, say hello if you're a podcast listener. And you've got other sites like your personal site as well.
My personal site is benceganti.com. So it's benceganti.com.
Great. And I'll put both of those up, and we'll get this out as soon as possible. So it'll be in time if people want to come. And the dates of the conference, just easy for those people.
Is the 22nd to the 27th of May. So this very month that we are in now, May, last week of May. So you guys have 2 to 3 weeks to consider, register, and come.
Great. I'm going to be there from the 21st. So if you want help setting up, Bence, then give me a shout. You can text me. I'll be there the day before, chilling out, swimming.
Awesome.
So I'm going to be there the whole week. I've rearranged my whole schedule to be there. Rearranged like 6 different podcasts for me to be there.
Oh boy.
She's done it. She's done great. Okay. And lastly, final message about the body, sir.
Well, meditate, and in your meditation, listen deeply to your body, especially the heart space, the center of the chest. That's where, guidance for your life is coming. That's my experience.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.